kau whakamiha ki a koutou e te iti e te rahi e Aotearoa ngā pou oroto ngā whare huri noa I te motu. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. O tira me huri pēu ake rā, te whakaaro ki a rātou, ko tomo atu nei I te whati toko o te rangi haere atu rā koutou, kauri atu rā ngā waipuketanga hupe aro I mata. O ki noa mai ki a tātou, o tira ngā mōrehu tanga mai o tātou wheinga, o tātou mātu, o tātou tupuna, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody and welcome to our webinar, E Tika, Te Rere o Te Kuaka. Ko te kōrero e takoto nei ka ngau ki te turi kāka o te paringa o te tai, E Tika Te Rere o Te Kuaka. The spinifex wanders along the beach like the incoming tide, the kuaka files and flies directly. I opened up with one of our tauparapara of the far north, which we have a strong connection to the kuaka. And also our visitors today, particularly our special guest from Alaska, and the connection between the Alaskan people and our people here in Aotearoa. It is such a wonderful pleasure and privilege to have them here and to have each and every one of you join our webinar today. Ka tia ke rā tēnei mihi ki a koutou, ki a tātou katoa hei whakatau I te ahuaranga ki a tātou I tēnei rā. Just before we go into our wonderful webinar with our guests, and just before I introduce our wonderful guests, can I remind everybody that there is the function to put your questions forward, and we have our wonderful engagement team who are behind the scenes to help navigate our waka or be part of the flock of the kuaka birds that we fly in formation so that we land well in the places of wonderful discussion, curiosity, observation, and in particular, lots of learning for us today to encourage us, to inspire us in the spaces that we occupy, share, and we all love with passion. And so before, if I can just take the opportunity to just say thank you again, once and all. We have our wonderful guests here today at Tātou Ma. And if I can just quickly introduce both of them. We have Rikki Solomon from Tāketimu, Mamaru Kura Haupō, ko Orangi, me o Manuwhiri, me rua hine ngā maunga, ko te ewe, me Waimahana, me Manawatu ngā moana, ko Ngāti Kahungunu, Ngāti Kahu ki Whangaroa, Rangitāne-o-Tamaki-nui-a-rua, ngā iwi, ko ngai te ipu, ko Ngāti Aukiwa, me Ngāti Pakapaka ngā hapu. Rikki has over 25 years of experience working in the tangihanga industry as a kaimanaki tūpāpaku, embalmer, and kaiatawhai, funeral director. Rikki also works as part of the Aronui team at Turuki Healthcare and facilitates the Maramataka Wānanga, which is the Māori calendar, with whānau. He also is a mataora change agent, ooh, I love that, who practices the principles of mahi a atua within Te Kurahuna, facilitating the Maramataka. Rikki is a graduate of He Waka Hiringa, Te Wānanga o Aotearoa. He is currently working towards his doctorate of Indigenous development and advancement at Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi. His focus is on ngā kitenga o te Maramataka, insights into the Maramataka or the Māori lunar calendar, and its relation to whakamomori or suicide. Nau mai, tauti mai, whakaiake mai rā I te whaariki takapau whare eriki I tēnei haora. Could I also take the opportunity to also introduce our very special guest from Alaska, Robert, or otherwise known as Bobby Schaeffer. Robert was born in Kotzebue, 1949, and has lived in and near Kotzebue his entire life. From a young age, he learned about the environment from his dad and other elders, which we can all relate to. He grew up hunting, fishing, and trapping. He has spent a lot of time on the waters and ice of Kotzebue Sound, fishing commercially and observing the fish, animals, and sea ice physics. He holds a US Coast Guard 25 gross ton master's license. He has been involved with marine-based research with the native village of Kotzebue for many years and has contracted under state, federal and private marine mapping and other oceanographic research projects. He is currently chairman for the native village of Kotzebue Tribal Council. Nau mai tauti mai Bobby, tēnā koe, nau mai whakaeke mai ki te whāri ki takapau whare o tā tātou webinar. Thank you again, both Rikki and Bobby, for joining us today with this webinar to share your experience and your strengths and also your vision and hope for your people and our people as we go into our kōrero. I'm going to hand it over just quickly to each of you if you'd like to just say hi to everybody and feel free to share anything that's on top for you at the moment. Otherwise, I'm quite happy if you are, we can start moving into our conversation. Let's start off with Rikki first and then Bobby.
Tēnā tātou katoa ki ngā whānau e mā taki ki rungi o tō tātou roro hiko kei wainganu o tō mahi, tō wāhi mahi o tō kainga kei te mihi ki a koutou mā. Tēnā koe te rangatira ruia mō tō mihi whakatau mō tō karakia i tēnei wā kei te mihi ki a koe. Tēnā koe te rangatira o Alaska, Bobby, kei te mihi ki a koe tēnō māhaki kei te noho ki Whangaroa o tō tātou whare i tēnei wā. Nō reira, kia ora. Just wanted to give a big mihi out to our whānau that are watching and humbled to be in your space and Ruia for your welcome and your karakia and your prayer to open up this hui, and to our special guest, Bobby, just humbled to be in this space with you and the vast amount of mātauranga knowledge that you have. And so I'm saying a big hello and welcome from us here in Aotearoa. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Bobby. I think you're on mute. Sorry. And thank you again for joining us. And please do share.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you. Wonderful.
Okay. As I was talking to myself for a second. Well, I appreciate the introduction. I am an extension of my father. We have modern times where we share everything like this, like Zoom, with all the modern conveniences, internet, and instant communication with anybody, anywhere. When I was growing up, we had nothing, but we had ourselves. We had our culture. We had our traditions. We had a language, but we did not have a written language. So everything was centered around observation, and it kind of extends the definition of observation simply because we had to remember from year to year the different aspects of our hunting and fishing traditions and different times of the season. And that was commonplace. And my father was the extension of his family, his father, especially his mother, who was a storyteller. But he always remembered from year to year how the environment was changing as global warming started, even back in the 50s. He started talking about the changes even then. But what I wanted to say is that he started talking to me when I was very young about the changes that he saw. He started talking about the extension of our summers. We had 4-month summers, and that was it. The rest of it was winter. And he noticed that there was changes between the spring and the fall, and they were longer. And that he started talking about the various aspects of what was happening to our environment, the different changes that he had witnessed. But he always talked about it because he was an observer. That's the way he was taught when he was very young. And I thought that I'd bring that out as I just start discussing some of the implications of global warming. I wanted to make that clear that I too was an observer before I started observing for the tribe and for the University of Alaska on Fairbanks, who's gathering a lot of our observations from the north, and then trying to put them into some sort of a data format so that we can use them, to map the changes that are happening in our environment here in Kotzebue, in the Kotzebue Sound area. I just also wanted to bring out the fact that we had a visit from President Obama probably 5 years ago, and he was his, because of all the places in our state that is witnessing climate change. We are the ones. Our temperatures rose 4 degrees Celsius in the last 12, 14 years. And our summers are getting hotter, and our winters are getting shorter and warmer. So I thought I'd bring that out. I thought, because it was recognized by the federal government, and we had the honor of having President Obama at the time come to visit us to observe some of these environmental changes that we were so concerned about because of global warming. Anyway, that's enough for my observations.
Mihi kia koe, Bobby, and I'm sure you could relate to some of those things that Bobby touched on, Rikki, in observation, as being an observer, tribal experience. Would you like to chime in on some of your experiences regarding maramataka? Yeah, please do share.
Yeah, no, it's observations was absolute paramount to our whānau. We observed everything, and I remember as a young, we just go, we were brought up in a time where you could just took what you needed, enough to feed your whānau and your kai, and we used to go to these places that we could always have an abundance of, if we went to the ocean, an abundance of kina or sea urchins and pawe, bologna and crayfish, and you just took what you needed to take and then come back. And then as the years have gone by, there's less and less. Actually, we can go there and there's nothing there. They've been cleaned out. We used to have white bait that used to come up our rivers. They're not there. The freshwater coda, which is the freshwater crayfish, they've disappeared. And even the tuna. So our observations is that, from what I said, people taking more than they need. Plus we have more housing being built, and farming is having a massive impact on everything. And that's what maramataka is the environmental calendar, is the observations of the taiao, of the environment. And we're seeing changes as more housing and the economy strains. That's having a massive impact on our taiao. And so what my father grew up with is completely different from what we have, and it was different from when my grandfather was around. And my grandfather was more of a farmer, so he was contributing to part of the problem that we have today. And now the farm that we have is just replanting it and turning back into native forest again, planting tōtara, rimu, karaka, all those trees that were removed so that farming can be there. We're in the process of restoring it back to how it was. And we're just going through a different generation. So it's the little things that we can do within our own space that makes a massive difference.
I'd certainly love to come back to you and speak more in depth about the maramataka, Rikki. If I could invite Bobby to comment. Rikki touched on changes in taonga species that we used to have in abundance and no longer there anymore or are dwindling. What are some of your experiences, Bobby, and your people with regards to traditional foods and some of the signs that you've noticed change over the years? And what are things looking like now in your observation?
We have a number of issues that I think not only affects some of the animals that we have. We probably heard about. We have the Western Arctic caribou herd that used to be 500,000 strong all my entire younger life, but now it's an endangered animal. It went from 500,000 down to 188,000, and that was critical for our survival for approaching for since time began, pretty much, you know. And but now that is in danger. We're not too optimistic about how fast it will grow once more enforcement is placed on or more management schemes are placed on the herd. But that's just one of them. I think the most important thing, of course, is that because of the heat that's being generated by global warming, we are being affected tremendously. I think the first thing, of course, I'd like to say is you mentioned the sea ice. It's critical for our seals. We have 4 species of seals that we hunt, and we get our staple, which is seal oil, from these seals. And we have also, we put away the meat after we dry it, and we store them in our seal oil. And it's sort of like a natural preservative to where they don't age, they don't spoil. So it keeps us going for the winter. And that's really a critical oil when it gets cold, is something that warms you up. And we have events of because of the lack of sea ice, simply because the air is getting warmer. I mentioned earlier about the summers, rather than being 4-month summers, we have 6-month summers now. And we're seeing that. We're seeing some high temperatures, and I'll get back to that, simply because I want to tell you about what high temperatures does to water. And when that happens, it can affect the fish species that are within the water areas. And we have a number of fish species up here that keeps us fed, and we have been doing that for centuries. And I think with getting back to the sea ice, when you have a lack of sea ice, and I'll go back to 2018 and 2019. You know, we're at Kotzebue, Alaska. We're 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle. Our winters are normally very cold and long. The ice is usually 5-6 feet thick. So it's always been safe to go out hunting seals and go out hunting caribou, go fishing for fish under the ice, like we always do, have always done for centuries. And since probably the turn of the century, even before that, things started changing. Our summers started getting hotter, and the falls became longer. The springs got shorter. The ice, it wouldn't freeze 4 or 5 feet thick anymore, because rather than having good 50 below weather, you know, for long periods of time, it never got past 20 below. So we lost 30 degrees in the real critical cold weather months of December and January, and even February for that matter. And it just got warmer and warmer. So the ice even the sea ice got a lot thinner. And what happens when that happens is that come springtime, when we normally hunt in June, we started hunting the seals because the ice was gone in May rather than in June. We used to hunt all the way until the bearded seal. We hunt until the second week in July. And now the ice is gone in the Kotzebue Sound and the Chukchi Sea by the end of May. And that's unheard of, you know. And so anyway, I wanted to get to that because in 2018 and 2019, we had no ice. All the ice, there was no ice in the Kotzebue Sound the whole year. And we're 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle. It's supposed to be cold, right? But it just didn't get cold enough to form. We had storm after storm after storm. It was also a snowstorm that built up the snow so deep that we lost a lot of our animals. Moose got high-centered on snowbanks, and people mentioned that they would run into a place in a creek where they found 6 moose that could not, when they fall through the snow, they could not get out of it because and it don't take them long to get hypothermia and die. So it affected the moose and some of our other animals as well. And they became prey to a lot of our predators up here that normally have a tough time trying to take down a moose, but when they get them, get the moose in deep snow. It was an easy lunch for a pack of wolves. And, you know, we have a lot of wolf up here because they've been here forever since we have a large caribou herd that they've followed as they migrate south. In fact, they're migrating now south as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
But I wanted to touch on the sea ice and how critical that is to us, because and how critical it is to the animals that have been here and have not witnessed changes, massive changes like this, because what it does, it just messes up their schedule, you know. And so when we go out there and hunt, and we're hunting a month early now, the ice is not thick, so it doesn't stay around very much longer. It melts quickly, and the seals that we normally hunt have a real tough time trying to find a place to haul out or to get back up on the ice after they feed. And they have to have that. And so by the time June comes around, the ice is gone. So the seals have to follow the ice north. And of course, it's very, especially the bearded seal, which, and so we don't have that much time to hunt. You know, so at least for all those years, from the 90s all the way until 2020, when it all of a sudden turned cold again. The La Nina showed up, and has showed up for 3 years in a row, that cooled off the waters in the Pacific. And we're feeling the effects of it because it cooled off the last 3 winters. And we've had, you know, 35, 40 below again. It was kind of nice.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's nice to you guys, but we enjoyed it because it froze the ice and made it a lot safer. But not only did that period of when we had very little ice development, but it not only did it affect the animals, but it affects us and our travel. In 1 year, just a borough of 7,000 people, we lost 6 people that fell into the thin ice and drowned and froze. So it not only did it affect the animals, but it affected the people as well. I recall back in 2015, as the caribou were migrating through, the ice was just too thin, but they had to migrate through, so they went on the ice. And in one place, there was 200 that perished. In one area, they fell into the ice and could not get out and end up dying. Not only did it affect the moose, because they fall through the ice as well, but it affected the caribou, and it affected us as people. As we were traveling, normally travel in 4 or 5 foot of ice, the ice just wasn't there for the last 3 or 4 years, at least from 2014 through 2020. And so then I like to get to another season. You know, that same spring in 2014, it was reported by the Fish and Wildlife Service, the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, that a huge die-off of our seabirds happened in our rookeries, and they were all wondering why this happened. And then I got involved back in 2016 when another die-off happened, because it was still, well, 2017 was pretty hot as well. I mean, I swear to God, I could plant a palm tree in Kotzebue during the summer, because that was how warm it was 30 miles north of the Arctic Circle. And people were joking about that, and I said, well, maybe it's going to happen with the way things are going, because, you know, we're getting less ice, and our animals, we are being affected negatively by these dramatic changes of temperature. And so anyway, that's the bird die-off happened probably 3 times until 2020, when we finally got La Nina, and then while the temperature started getting colder. It was welcome to us, because the last 3 winters have been fairly cold, and our springs have been a lot better hunting. We had better ice to hunt with, and people were more successful going out and getting their seal products. The seal harvest was good. So, but the temperature does a lot of things to us. It confuses everything. The birds are coming in earlier. They're nesting earlier. You know, the fish are coming in and from their oceans, and are spawning earlier than they normally do. And what happened was with the bird die-off is that the waters got so warm on the beaches near the rookeries, so there were these huge cliffs that you probably have the same thing where these huge cliffs that all the seabirds just by the thousands nest in those areas. The waters just got too warm near the beaches, so all the fish that spawned, and that's what saves the birds, is that as the fish spawn, the young, after they hatch, they go down and they feed off those shallows around the rookeries, and so the seabirds have a plentiful amount of feed. But when the waters get too warm, like they did back in those years of 2014 to 2008 to 2019, the fish cannot survive in warm water. They're cold water fish. So what happened was that all the fish moved out into the ocean because the water was just too warm on the beaches. You know, it was just amazing. I looked at NOAA's map, and they had a map of from the satellites that through a thermal picture was taken, and the red line was 40 miles out from Kotzebue Sound into the Arctic Ocean, and it was just too doggone warm. So all the fish, the feed fish for the rookeries, all went out to the deeper waters, because that's where the deeper waters was where the cold water was that they could survive in. And so that's what happened to our birds. Thousands starved to death because they couldn't leave the rookery because they had laid eggs, but there was nothing to feed on. And so thousands of birds died, probably 4 or 5 years in running. And not only did it affect them, our rivers got so warm that we had a die-off in 2014 of millions of our salmon that come into the Kotzebue Sound and go up the Noatak and Kobuk rivers and spawn at their spawning streams. The rivers got so warm. We had 100 degree Fahrenheit temperatures in most of our villages up the Kobuk and the Noatak. And people, some of the elders were moving down to Kotzebue to the coast because it was 70, 75 degrees here, but it was over 100 degrees in our villages. And so it was just too hot for the elders, so they had to move down. Otherwise, we don't have air conditioning up there. We never needed it. And so they moved, a lot of them moved down to Kotzebue because it was a cooler, they could survive in something like this. But a lot of them stayed up there and suffered. It was really a bad year. But anyway, the waters in the rivers got so warm that the salmon could not go up the Kobuk River or the Noatak River to their spawning streams. In fact, their spawning streams, according to the Department of Fish and Game Biologists, got so warm that they could not support life, any kind of fish life in those streams. So that's what happened to the salmon. They got confused. Salmon are in a biological time. They have to spawn at a specific time. If they don't, then they'll spawn anyway, but they didn't make it to their streams because it was too warm. So we had millions of our salmon die that year. We were just lucky that the fall run, we had some storms come through and it cooled off the waters. They were able to save us for that year. Because 4 years, they go out to the ocean and 4 years later they come back. And so our runs remained fairly strong 4 years later. But this is what temperature is doing. I can go on if you want me to talk about how it affects the environment.
Sorry, Bobby. I was just wondering and curious that this global and the heat impact, and for those who may know, 100 degrees Fahrenheit is equal to 37.78 degrees Celsius. Now that's pretty hot, particularly for us here in the deep South Pacific. I'm just curious and wondering, and to give you time to maybe reflect on, you mentioned that President Obama visited you, and also your role on the tribal councils. And you mentioned about the elders, the patterns of movement of your taonga, what we call taonga, or your special species that are special to your people. I'm wondering how how your responses are and how you might protect, or how we might make those changes to protect those spaces. You mentioned about the sea ice and the seals, etc. I'll give you just some time just to reflect on that, and I'll come back to you. And Rikki, you would have heard Bobby mentioning about, again, in your particular experience, global warming, high temperatures, our species, etc. And in your particular rohe, what have you seen changing? What are the species that are changing in your rohe, and how does maramataka help, I suppose? And then I'll come back to Bobby and he can continue on with how the heat impacts on that and how Indigenous or First Nation knowledge might be useful in improving our lives. Rikki?
You know, as I was listening into Bobby, it was just a whakatauki that was going through my mind, which goes tuia i runga, tuia i raro, tuia i roto, tuia i waho, meaning whatever is happening above in our northern hemisphere is directly impacting us down here in the southern hemisphere, and whatever decisions and choices we make here in Aotearoa will naturally affect the southern hemisphere, will affect the northern hemisphere. And one thing I have observed here, it is warmer. You know, in the last few years, especially being here in Tamaki Makaurau, it's just, there's not much difference between like summer and winter. It's just been like this constant. Summer is hot, but there's not a very cold winter. And the last few years, I've been going down into Waiponamu, the South Island, and especially around Matariki, and it hasn't been that cold. Even in this year, in terms of Ruia Aperahama, our main the skiing mountains, they had to cut their season short. There wasn't just enough snow that never fell this year, and so it's not as cold. We had a long summer. It's been quite dry. It's only in the last month that we've had a lot of rain turn up. But then I sort of reflected about, and I think it was a year or two ago, where some of the rivers were drying up and the swamps were drying up, and a lot of the eels were getting caught and dying. And they were I think it was over in Hauraki, where they were finding it was so hot that the swamps and everything dried out, and thousands of eels died because of there was a lack of water, or they weren't able to hide or shade. And those are the memories that we're the insights that Bobby was talking about. So whatever's happening above is reflecting exactly down here as well. We're a little bit not as close to the cold, so I'm wondering, is the same thing happening down in Antarctica as well? Are they having the same, seeing the same sort of changes that Bobby's encountering up in Alaska? And so in terms of maramataka, it's an environmental calendar. It's about watching and observing the taiao and moving with the patterns. And every decision, and I've always been of this opinion that it's everyone's responsibility to do this, to look after our papa tuanuku environment. And maramataka is all about, there's time to take, there's time to rest, there's time to take from our oceans, there's times to leave the oceans alone. But we live in a society now where commercialism is just constantly taking and taking and taking, and not giving space for the environment to have a rest. Our tipuna, all through winter, our winter months, they would leave the taiao alone. They wouldn't touch it. And so there's times that even each month, there's times that you take from the oceans, there's times you leave it alone, there's time in the month that you would go into the forest to gather the kai that you need, the food and the resources that you need, you leave it alone. And then you come out, and so you only took what you needed, and it was about working around sustainability. And so often we look at the environment, we're not taking from ourselves, we're stealing from our future, our descendants. We're taking from them, and if we just continue to do exactly what we're doing and not changing what we're changing our patterns and behaviors, it becomes very scary to think about, what are my grandchildren, what are they going to have, and even their children. And it's every decision we make now is absolutely vital for our environment to survive.
You mentioned about commercialism and the impact on our seasons and how we engage as a people in our tribal areas, and how we kind of manage around it. It's almost living another calendar or another time paradigm shift or a way of thinking mindset, and then trying to shift back into another paradigm or mindset, which is particularly us and our indigenousness. I wonder if you could just touch on how do you think we can navigate between those two things, and then I'll come back to Bobby, and I'm very interested to hear what their experiences has been on protecting a way of life as opposed to the Western. And as you mentioned earlier, some of the things with their government and state, and also how we protect our customs and our activities, seasonal activities. Speak a little bit more on that, please. Share a little bit more on that, please, Rikki, and how we might manage that between Western and Indigenous.
Yep, there's a whakatauki that goes tui ki te rangi, tui ki te whenua, tui ki te moana. The heavens and the land and the oceans are bound together as one. And if we impact and every decision that we make on the whenua will naturally affect the oceans. Anything we do to the oceans will naturally affect the whenua and the heavens. And what they look like, often when we talk about the oceans, we often have the fisheries there, and they're there representing, talking about the oceans. But in a hui, I said, well, in this hui should be the iwi, but also forestry, and anyone that works in that environment should be sitting as a part of that hui in terms of our oceans. So that when people talk about the oceans, the forestry and all those that work on the land know the impact of their decisions and everything that they do to the whenua, or to the oceans. And when we talk about the forestry, those same fisheries and those same people should be sitting in those meetings. And often we approach things in isolation and individualism. One of the most powerful things that we know is when we work together as a collective. Nothing in this world was ever created in isolation. We can have a look at the star Rehua, which is Antares, and when that rises in the morning, signals the blooming of the Pou Tikanga tree. And when the Pou Tikanga tree blooms red, or for us, most of our Māori go, wow, the kina effect. Everything is triangulated together. So we have, and that's what maramataka is triangulating and working with the whenua, working with the ocean, and working with the stars and the moon, because they're all connected together. And there's another part of that whakatauki goes, e rongo te pōronga te ao, is how do we navigate this world in terms of te ao, this Western world, how do we navigate this Western world but still maintain our Indigenous rights in that, and having these two different views of the environment and of the world working collaboratively together, because when we can all sit together around the table as Indigenous or as an iwi, and with our scientists are experts in their field, but they often look in an individual way. How do we look at everything that connected? Not only just studying the tuna, but what is the whakapapa of the tuna on the land? When we look at the whales, the tahora, we know that they connect with our trees. And we know that there's the whakatauki that goes, ko au te whenua, ko te whenua ko au. Ko au te awa, ko te awa ko au. I am the land and the land is me, and I am the river and the river is me. And it's about everything out in the environment is an extension of me. And our health and well-being should be focused on the environmental. That should be the center of our whole plan, is the taiao, the environment. Because with the 50 or 60 or 70, 80 years that I'm here, then I move on, but the environment's still here. And as we heal and work with the environment, it naturally heals ourselves, our whānau, and our hapu and our iwi.
Mm-hmm. Before I come back to Bobby, and thank you so very much, Bobby and Rikki, for being with us on this webinar, and for the sake of our webinar family who have joined and perhaps have just recently joined, you're invited to put up any questions to our two wonderful guests, because at 1 o'clock, if you have any questions, I'm going to open up the opportunity for those questions to be put to to both Bobby and Rikki. And again, I'm really grateful for this. As I mentioned earlier, this is more of a discussion. And as we move a little bit closer to 1 o'clock, I'm going to also invite Rikki and Bobby, if they have any questions to one another, and to have a conversation around that in terms of your experience. Coming back to you, Bobby, and thank you again. The impact of global warming, sea ice, high temperatures, changes of your hunting practices, your elders, etc., and how do you manage all of that, and also your relationship with state, the tribal council, and as you mentioned earlier, President Obama, and how does that all fit into all of that? And I remember the last time when we were just before you were talking about temperature. If you'd like to continue talking temperature, and then perhaps touch on some of those other things, those other experiences you've had.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think I didn't get to the main, what I really wanted to talk about, and I because temperature is like a double-edged sword. It not only it changes, the entire ecosystem. It affected the ecosystem. It affected the environment. But I wanted to talk more about the real bad stuff that's coming out of the high temperatures and the thawing of our permafrost. If you don't know what permafrost is, it's pretty much found in the entire northern parts of our world, where we were affected by the glacial ice thousands and thousands of years ago, and as time went on, the earth and the dust and everything covered the ice and made a layer for us to live and for the animals to thrive, made the tundra. And so that's been with us for a long time. Provided a lot of our vegetation and our berries, and then provided the food for all of the animals, the caribou and the moose and all the animals that we use for our to keep us alive, for our protein. And but what I wanted to touch on was the high temperatures and how it's affecting the melting of the permafrost. And it's a real dangerous thing, and so it sort of puts us as a real defensive, because we don't know what to do. We talk about what we do traditionally, because the most important thing that coming out of this entire questioning, or the entire presentation that I have, is food security. And that's what we look at. We beat that around amongst ourselves all the time, because I'll give you an example. Because as a permafrost melts, huge amounts of natural carbon dioxide is emitted into the air, and that's not the bad part. The other part is it's been there for so many thousands of years that the animals that had perished in them, the mastodon, the hairy, the woolly mammoth, the woolly rhinoceros. I can go on a list of all those extinct species that have died for thousands of years. It's just, you wonder where you get your oil from. But anyway, when they thaw out, natural methane is spewed into the atmosphere. It's emitted into the air, into the atmosphere. And the scientific community came out with a bulletin not too long ago that they underestimated the amount of carbon and the amount of methane that is being emitted into the air because massive melting of the permafrost in the northern, above the northern Arctic Circle around the world. And so you look at carbon emissions, because right now, within the last 10 years, it's multiplied so many times that rather than that 288 parts per million for a long time to 290, it's jumped up to 440 million parts per million. And so it's on a real dangerous level. And as time goes on, as we start talking about all the fires worldwide, we're like talking about massive heat, worldwide. You look at what happened with a pictorial graph of the Earth in 1970, and you do the same thing on the same day today, and it's a tremendous amounts of difference. It's so much different because the heat shows up today worldwide. And so everybody's dealing with this heat, but very few countries are dealing with the cause of the problem. And that's the scary part for us because, not only has since 1970, has our world population doubled, the demand for services to those that were born after double. And so there's more jet planes and more cars. Just in America alone, there's 290 million cars being driven every day on our streets. That's just America alone. So we look at it, we're trying to look at it from a tribal perspective, but there are so many other things affecting our way of thinking, because when they talk about mass extinction because of what we're doing to our planet, then you have to try to absorb what they mean by it. Is there a drop dead date for our planet, or is there something that we as human beings can do to try to curb it, to try to save our planet and save future generations? And I wake up in the morning, I worry about my grandchildren. I've got great grandchildren now, and what are they going to wake up to 30 years from now when you cannot breathe the air? And it really bothers me. So I look at it from that perspective, and I think a lot of people are seeing it in that light, because it's becoming more and more prevalent worldwide, the discussions. But there are more non-believers than there are believers. And that's the problem I think I see, is it's not changing public policy worldwide like it should. I mean, look at Russia. They just decided to invade a peaceful country. Now they're blowing up all the oil reserves and the gas lines and spewing more carbon dioxide into the air, more than we need. There's a tipping point that they talk about. I think that has been talked about by us for a long time, because they started talking about it 2 years ago. Once we get to that tipping point, and then it goes down on the other side of it, there is going to be we're talking mass extinction. But no one wants to admit that. No one wants to admit it. So I talked about food security. Maybe so I just wanted to throw that in. But food security is really important to us. We've been hunting and fishing since time began. And when what's happening to the atmosphere starts affecting our food chain, because you talk about carbon emissions from happening from all the fires, from all the cars, and everybody that's burning fossil fuels, and this going up crazy, going up so high, the highest that it's been in 800,000 years. And so anyway, you start talking about food security, and when you have a meeting in London that happened almost 2 years ago now, when a scientific community got together and they're almost looking at all the various studies done on acidification, because as carbon goes into the ocean, it acidifies the ocean. And they worried about the northern part of the state, of our state, because our waters are a lot colder. And it sticks to the cold waters a lot more than it does to where you're from, because the waters are a lot warmer. So, but they're talking about acidification affecting the food chain of the krill, the planktons that are growing, that feed all the whales that go up to the North Slope to feed during the summertime. It also is going to affect the cod, because they too feed on the krill. When that affects the cod, it affects our seals. And so the scientific community said, well, within this century, maybe a little more than likely, if the rate the humanoids are going and are allowing massive amounts of carbon into the atmosphere and methane, they figure that it's going to be too hot, and that more than likely the oceans will die. When they said, yeah, 52% of coral reefs that are dying now, can you imagine what's going to happen to the coral reefs, as carbon continues to be emitted into the air unchecked? So it's up to us, and if we're looking at it from that perspective, from a tribal perspective, it's hard to think that simply because there's more to the tipping point than meets the eye. And it's really difficult for us. We're so concerned about our animals because we're an ocean people, just like you. And we're so concerned about our animals, but we know what's looming in the background. We know what's looming out there, the poisons that are being placed into the atmosphere that will allow our Earth to continue to heat up. And it's hard for Indigenous folks like us to grasp that, because what they're doing basically is rather than a double-edged sword, they're giving you giving you the sword, and that there's if we don't take this seriously, the end is mass extinction.
You just mentioned there's more to the tipping point than meets the eye. And thank you for giving us a reality check again and reminding us of the severe impact of high temperatures and global warming. And at times it feels overwhelming, but being resilient people, and as Indigenous First Nation peoples, we've survived a lot and we're still here. And I am just wondering, as we get close to the top of the hour, and we've received some questions from our participants, I'm wondering if, and thank you again, both of you, I really appreciate this, Bobby and Rikki. I wonder if, given the shared experience that you both touched on, the environment that you both come from, the impacts on the environment, the impacts on your communities, the impacts on how we behave, the impacts on how we choose to engage. And as we moved into the 1 o'clock hour, I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on what can we do as Indigenous people to curb this, if any, and what are some hope and inspiration. But at this point in time, I'm going to give both you and Rikki, Bobby and Rikki, an opportunity to ask if you have any questions you'd like to ask one another and have a conversation around those. Rikki, have you any questions for Bobby, and then Bobby to Rikki?
Yeah, no, one of the ones that sort of stood out to me is around, there's more naysayers than there are sayers in terms of global warming and the impact. And the question is how do we educate more of our people that don't believe that there's any problem, and get those whānau that are sitting in this other team, how do we get them over and get them into more believing? Because often they don't see what we see, but they often say, "Oh, there's no global warming. It's just it's a made up thing. It's not real." How do you deal with that, Bobby?
Yeah, I think advocacy has always been lacking. You know, there's a lot of non-believers out there. You know, you don't want to take away their the luxuries of life, you know, because they require gasoline to enjoy. You don't want to take away the heat from their homes because it takes oil to heat them. You don't want to they want to go visit their family, you know, and they take jet fuel to get there. So there's a lot of dependence, a lot of luxuries that, you know, that people enjoy. We do enjoy it here, for gosh sake, you know, it's just changing pretty much everywhere. And although we're indigenous, we still enjoy our country. We still enjoy picking our food from out in the oceans and from the land, you know. But I think there's a serious threat to it, and I think advocacy is always, in my mind, it's something that we have to do better at. I've talked to the folks with our tribe. I've talked to the people that I work with the AOKH out of Fairbanks that deal with the climate change through the University of Alaska, and we're lacking in advocacy. And so what's been happening is that I've taken every opportunity to talk. I've had a couple of reporters from the New York Times and from the London Times that interviewed me, and because they've heard about the massive changes just within Kotzebue area because of the 4-degree Celsius increase in temperature and how it's affecting our environment and our animals and our fish. So I take the opportunity every chance I get to try to bring the word out that this is real. This is something that the humanoid is going to have to make some sacrifices in order for us, you know, to continue on this planet. Because if we continue on the way we're going now, none of us are going to be around at the turn of the century. And then that's the thing that I want to express, and that Bobby even talked to as many people as I possibly can about getting the word out, so people will become more concerned and they can change public policy.
How about you, Rikki? How would you respond to that, your own question, with your own whānau hapuiwi or tamariki e mokopuna? And what stories and narratives do you tell them other than the deficit?
Often, first and foremost, that we have to understand that we're contributing to the problem as well. In terms of, you know, we like our homes, we like our trucks, we like to fly, and so we're part of that problem as well. So we're also contributing to the effect that we're having on the environment. But what gives me hope is that in our schools, our younger generations, my kids and the younger ones are coming through an education system that talks about kaitiakitanga and about caring for the environment. So they're getting a lot more savvy and educated. So we've got this new generation of young kids, children coming through. And I was actually reading, I think it was on the news or reading the paper about a young 16-year-old student that was leading an environmental change, and she came up against a reporter that didn't believe in her, and this pretty much absolutely attacked her and sort of made mocking in front of her. But what gets me is our kids are getting taught how to care for the environment. They're getting taught all these wonderful things. It's us adults that need to change our behaviours and to educate educate ourselves. Our iwi, it's even, and when we look at maramataka is an environment calendar specifically for your rohe and for your iwi. And so each marae or hapu should have a look at their calendar, study their environment around us. Where I come from, we have a lake that there, which was a supply of all of our tuna, our eels, and the farmers wanted to drain it. They wanted to drain it out so that they could have more farmland, they tried to do it, but it made up the iwi were like, no, or the hapu were like, no, we're not going to allow you to do that. But they slowly just flush that water, trying to move the water out. So it's what can we do in our own areas. The other part is start at home. What am I doing in my house that is contributing to the problem? And if we all do a little bit each, because often I use the whakatauki, everyone tries to save the river, but let's worry about what's the stream that feeds that river. Take care of that stream and that ngāhere around it. And if we all did it, the health of that river will be maintained. We're at a point now we need to not just, so it's not about sustainability now, and I'm sure Bobby will agree this, we're in desperate actions of work to do right now. What does that look like? We don't know. Exactly what is the right formula? We don't know. But we need to do something now and to get this conversation moving.
That's interesting, Rikki. And Bobby, you touched on and you shared with us about when you wake, you have great concern and worry for your grandchildren. What are the stories or conversations you do have with them? And if any, as what Rikki's touched on, how do you inspire hope? Howbeit that we are confronted with sometimes limited control on certain things as you touched on in the state and policy, etc. What are some of the stories that you share with your grandchildren to inspire hope?
But what I do is because most of my children and my grandchildren I raised out in the scrub, out in the sticks, right where my father was born and raised, and I decided that was important because I wanted to go out there and I wanted to teach them what my father taught me about life in Iñupiaq world, life around Kotzebue, because that's all I know, being Iñupiaq, being an Eskimo, and so I took them out and I moved them to camp. We moved to camp, and some of them were pretty much born out there, and were born and raised. And I was real proud of one of my daughters. She built herself a beautiful home, and I helped her build it up there at our camp 30 miles north of Kotzebue, out toward the mountains. And she decided she wanted to do the same thing I did. And so she took her 4 children and her husband, and they went over and they made arrangements to move out there and to teach their kids everything that I taught them about food prep, hunting and fishing, and how to do it, and even during the cold, we have nets under the ice when we can, things of that nature. But I think that was something that I did that I felt was really, I was glad that one of my children really understood that. And I think just them being raised out there, they already know, when they go out hunting, even from Kotzebue, that they already know what they do, what they do, how you prepare an animal. They already know the spirituality of that animal, because we're very spiritual people. And I teach them that because I was taught that by my father. And so, I mean, there's a center of appreciation for there's life in everything that we eat up here. Everything that has life has a spirit. We believe that. And so that's the exciting part of, I think, trying to instill in her, and then being out there with her back again. I left Kotzebue and went back at camp again, and enjoying, taking the children out and enjoying them out, and taking my family out for outings to look for caribou and moose and go fishing. And we put a lot of salmon away this summer. We prepared a lot of salmon and smoked them. We did a lot of different things that I learned when I was young from my father, how to preserve the salmon. So those are the things that I think that the spiritual things of our people are really, it's really strong. And I think when you leave all this Western stuff behind and you go out there, your spirit awakens and you feel good about what you're doing, because it's not about the influences that are coming up from the South that influence you. It's about you and being Iñupiaq, being Eskimo, and the spirit that has been there with us since time began.
Oh, I love that, Bobby. I really love what you just touched on in our spirituality and for First Nation and Indigenous peoples, in the light of the huge, massive capitalism and those huge machines and industries. Spirituality, is very much a powerful essence for us. And I'm wondering if you could touch on some of the spiritual practices and rituals that your people have with regards to the preserving or the protecting or, as you mentioned earlier, the care of life and the special species that you have. And then I'll come back to you, Rikki, if you want to chime in on that as well.
Well, it was a very difficult transition when the missionaries came. And that was probably the group of folk that affected us more negatively than anything else. They took away our spirituality for a long, long time, and because they felt it was sacrilegious. And we lost our shamans, or Iñupiaqs, we call, that were real critical to our people, to save the health and safety of our people for thousands of years. And but now people, they even banned Eskimo dancing, our traditional dances, for a lot of years, but they're coming back. The only thing we're losing that we had even back in the 1960s was most everybody spoke our native language, but we're losing that now, and because all the elders have gone, and every time an Iñupiaq speaking elder dies, that's one less Iñupiaq speaker. So we're not being very successful in trying to revitalize our language. And the language is the key to our culture. And so I think that's one of the things that we have to try to work on and try to build up, because it's something that is happening pretty much all over. To lose the loss of language, and we all felt that when we lost our language, we lost a good piece of our culture. And rather than 75-80% speaking it, now we've only got 10% speaking it. Because the elders are dying, and the language was never taught to their children. And so anyway, I think of all the things that we might lose is our language, and it'll be very hard to bring it back when you want to get the numbers so low, and the priorities of people have changed, toward more Western kind of living rather than our way of living.
I can't help but draw the comparison between our languages, our customs, our way of living, and also the environment and the huge impact that not only colonization has had on First Nation peoples, but also the environment and the high temperatures, etc., which seems very overwhelming. But the resilience that we've shown, I'm certainly inspired. Your experience on that, Rikki, and while you're just gathering your thoughts, our family who are on the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer panel. I do have a couple of questions for the both of you, but coming back to you, Rikki, what's your response, or what are your thoughts on what we've just touched on?
As we often look at the environment as our tuakana, and that we're the Pōtiki. Everything was created before us, and we're like the youngest, last creation to come into this beautiful world that we live in. And often the Pōtiki of the whānau gets away, and the youngest in our family often gets away with the most. They get away with things, but at the end of the day, they end up looking after their parents. being the younger sibling. And when we have a look at our environment, it's a spiritual connection to the taiao. It's our older, it's a tuakana. They were here before us, and when you're gathering kai, it's not just about providing food, but it's a ritual of that we have in Te Ao Māori. Is the first catch that we get, whether there be a fish or a kina or some food, we give that back to Tangaroa, which is a ritual to acknowledge that we are the Pōtiki, but it's also a spiritual connection, wairua connection of gathering food. It's all karakia. It's often a time of gratitude, being thankful and providing this kai for us. It's a way of, I remember growing up in a home that we preserved lots of kai. And I'm sure a lot of our families here in Aotearoa growing up would have been preserving fruit and preserving fish and preserving watercress and all these beautiful kai. And we had cupboards full of kai, and it was all revolved around food sovereignty. We grew all our own gardens. We had all our own sheds full of pumpkins and kumara, and we didn't have to rely on anything else. We could just grow everything else. And then when I moved into the city, up to Auckland, away from my community, the rural community, that sort of lifestyle changed and had to become more reliant on the supermarket. But there's more and more families wanting to go back to food sovereignty of going the alkai, because it brings the whānau together. We used to sit around peeling and preserving, and our kuia, our nans and my aunties, they'll be telling stories. It was a lot of learning that went in it, a lot of healing, a lot of rongoa, a lot of connection, and then for us young men, we would go out fishing to go and gather. It was about the family working together as a collective, and those are the sorts of things that are that not only got food sovereignty, but it's also around kai and the spiritual connection of the family, and building relationships with the fathers, with their sons, with their grandfathers. And my kōrero would be telling us stories about when they went fishing and the things that they learned and what to look out for. So a lot of knowledge was passed down through story. And so it's, when we have a look at it, it's all around connections and whakapapa and relationship. Indigenous knowledge is all around our relationship to the taiao. We have a relationship with the environment. We're going to care for that environment. If we have a relationship with the ocean, we're going to do all that we can to look after that relationship. With my family, it's about connecting those relationships, and we treat our environment the same way as our whānau, just building and connecting those relationships. And those that don't have a connection or relationship, they've got nothing to connect with. And so when we learn about Maramataka Māori and environmental calendars, it's about building your relationship again with the environment that's around you. And as people reconnect and learn their identity, their whakapapa, they learn that their identity sits out in the environment with them.
Kia ora, Rikki, thank you. I'm just summarising the questions that I've just received. What I would be interested to know is, from this point onwards, what are, and you've already touched on some of them, including you, Bobby, and thank you both very much, Bobby and Rikki. What are some solutions that we can take and some actions that we can take right now in order to start from our communities, out into our communities, and to the wider community, and possibly and ideally the wider environment in other communities? I'm very interested to hear what some of your solutions might be. Bobby?
Well, I think I spoke of advocacy. You have to advocate for, to save our planet, to save our people, to save us. And it's gone beyond local. It's just something that has to be widespread, worldwide. It's something like Greta Thunberg, someone like that has been trying to tell people that if we don't change our ways, she as a young person doesn't have a future, because the future will be gone. And I think advocacy, just the roles that we take, just like me trying to get the word out, and every chance I get from a reporter, I talk to them about my feelings and what's happening to me and to my people here in Kotzebue, all the negative things that are happening. And then I know the perspective worldwide because I study it. I keep up with it on a daily basis. So I know the numbers, I know where it's going, but you know, how do you convince a non-believer that this is really happening? And I think it's just being persistent, you know. And on the local level, I think it's really important to to talk with the children to get them to understand the importance of the issues centered around global warming, climate change, or whatever we want to call it. It's both the same. And after experiencing Hurricane Marbach last week, you know, it came up to Alaska and it beat the heck out of us, and it was very scary because usually it's too cold. We're always too cold, you know, to strengthen a hurricane, but they're not anymore. This is the second one we've gotten since 2011, and the one in 2011 I felt was a lot stronger. But they're coming up here now, and massive storms, the changes. If we can't sell it to our people and try to make, you know, public policy change worldwide, then we're in for it. You know, we're not going to be around much longer if that's going to be the case.
Your suggestions, Rikki, what are some of the solutions? And I know both of you have already touched on them. What are some of the solutions you might offer? And I'm just wondering what would be useful for our whānau who are on the webinar that they could take away to their organizations and help inspire and continue that momentum in the fields of research, etc. And for both of you, before we come to the end, what plans do you have of nurturing tribal scientists and relationships between working with other research institutes and how that might help? But coming back to you, Rikki, some solutions you might want to offer to our listeners.
One of the ways of a solution, the way we do is actually learning the maramataka. For every hapu and iwi has a maramataka, and often people just go in there to learn at the maramataka, but then they learn that their positioning within the taiao, that everything they need is in the maramataka. It's having a look in just something simple. If you're in the city, just going and looking at the stream that's running past you. Often we don't take an account of what surrounds us. We're often looking way out in the horizon. I always start from within my home. And when we start within our home, and then moving out into the streets, having a look what's happening in the streets, moving into what birds, into the ngahere that's around. It's about being responsible. There's no quick answer, but even there's one of the big ones that we talk about in our maramataka is give back days. These are days that we don't take from certain environments. So and there's 4 of them in a calendar month, and one of them being a huna, which means a hidden day. And on that day we koha, we give back to Tangaroa. We clean up the ocean. There's another one called Otane where we can go and clean up the forest and plant trees. There's another one called Oike, which is a give back day to Papa Tūnuku, which is our Earth Mother. And what that looks like is up to the individual, but we set aside particular days that we don't take, but we give back. And the other one being Uenuku Te Rangi Nui, the sky. It's just doing simple changes. Education is the big one. Advocacy. Just as Bobby said, it's about educating and talking and spreading the message around that. If we don't change or we don't make changes now, we're going to run into big problems later on. And what we do finding is more and more champions and more whānau, as they connect to the environment, they're making changes, and we just need to get more organisation. If you're an organisation, what can you do to give back to the environment, to the tai, whether that be in the ocean or into the ngahere? Find something that works. We could be planting trees. There's so much that we can do.
Ka mihi ki e nā haka māramatanga mai pāna ki ngā māramataka Māori. We're almost to the end of our discussion, but I want to come back to you, Bobby, and before I do, I want to, because ko koe te kaumātua, you're the elder among us, and I would love to give you the opportunity to have the last final word and some inspiration and some thoughts and reflections to our webinar family. There are a question that has been asked. The observations that both of you have made, are they recorded? And where can our webinar family have access to the observations that both of you have made? Either one of you, Bobby or Rikki?
Yeah, I do observations for the University of Alaska through a contract with our tribe, and that's all of my observations are of changes I see in the environment and the animals and the fish. I jot them down. I'm also involved with the tribe on studying the growth of algae, since the earth is warming up, because the algae affects the fish food chain within our area, and that's really important. So I just thought I'd throw that in.
Thank you, Bobby. Rikki, where can people find your observations and some of your findings of your research?
Most of ours is in wānanga and in different iwi and different whānau. It's more centralised to all of them. But there's so many resources available now in terms of online, different organisations are constantly doing study on the environment and the impacts. You know, one of the best people to actually talk to get a lot of this mātauranga is our kaumātua and our kuia, our Pākeke. They often are sitting on so much mātauranga and so much knowledge in the environment that they're in. We overlook them and go to the uneducated, or we go to these doctors, but they can tell you everything that has changed in the area. I believe that they've been underutilized, they're not being listened to, and they know the changes. They can tell when, especially those that live on the coast, they can tell when a sandbar is moved, and the impact that this is, that the water's up higher now than when it was when they were younger. They'll tell you that, you know, certain fish aren't coming in now because the environment has changed. I think we need to utilise our kaumātua and our kui a lot more that reside in those areas. They sit on a gold mine of mātauranga that would baffle even our scientists.
Bueno, nei ake te ngā kaumau ka mahukia ke roto I taku ngā kau tēnei hakamihi kia kaurua. Bobby and Rikki, thank you so very much for joining us. And as I mentioned, Bobby, you're the kaumātua and the elder amongst us. I'd like to offer you the next 3 to 4 minutes to touch on, and what I really love what you shared about was being part of the food system, spirituality, and to persevere. And Rikki touched on making sacrifices. I'd like to offer you the last closing statement to us and to everybody here for our whānau, and then I'll close up with a karakia or a prayer and a waiata.
Yeah, thank you. All this is, I do it for a reason. You know, I want my children, my great-grandchildren, my great-great-grandchildren to wake up knowing they are Iñupiaq, Eskimo, knowing our spirituality, the importance of it. I want them to, have a future, you know, a normal future rather than what I'm going through as a youth and then middle age, now an elder, that I've been battling with now for 60 years, because I saw what my dad was seeing, and he kept mentioning the changes. But what I'd like to see is, at least my dream, my hope is that they can wake up to a morning like I woke up back in 1950. The sun was shining, there was a cool air, the air was nice and clean, it felt clean. I mean, that's what I want for them. I want them to be happy and safe, and and my goal is even as we speak is to try to influence the public that we have to make changes to our people, and then to expand it out into like I said, I've talked to a number of groups, and my concern, of course, they all know that. But how do you just to advocate for our Mother Earth? That's the bottom line.
Thank you both, Bobby and Rikki. It's been a wonderful pleasure, absolute pleasure to share this last hour and a half with you both, your experience, your observations, your wisdom, and your insights, and most of all, the inspiration to continue to persevere in this space. Oi no ka tia ke rai e tātou mā koe ke rā tātou I nai nei, tata hau whāmai, haroha mai, hawhe pahi mai te tahi karaka. Again, it's been wonderful. I've learned so much from both of you, and I wish we could have more conversations around this. And I'm sure there will be, but I'm just so grateful. Bobby, thank you. Tēnā koe, Rikki, tēnā hoki koe, kaurua ngātahi. Oi no, tēnei ka whakairia kei te kōrero ki roto ki te whatapātaka. Thank you, family, for all joining us with our webinar today. And with that, whakaronga kei ki te tangia te manua te tūi, karanga ke nei tui ia, whakaronga ke nei au ki te tangia te manua te huia, hui nei a tātou, whakaronga ke au ki te tangia te pipi wharaurua, kui whiti ora. Tō tātou aka, ko te rangi mārie, te hoi o runga, ko puna te aroha ei, ko te aroha te mea nui, o ngā mea ka atoa, ai rā a te kupu, o ngā tua nei e. Nō reira, ko te whakaiatanga e, tēnei te kaupapa ka ea, tēnei te wānanga ka ea. Tēnei te mauri o te kaupapa ka whakamoea, tēnei te mauri o te wānanga ka whakamoea. Koa ki runga, koa ki raro. Tāwhia kia rehua ki te marama tūturu, whiti whakamaua kia tīnā. Haumi e hui e, tai ki e. Thank you very much.
Thank you.